Chapter 2 of Tractate Zevachim continues on the laws of temple offerings, particularly on principles of offering or consuming them with improper intent. The first Mishnah says, any offering whose blood was received by a non-Kohen, or a mourner, or somebody impure who had only just immersed on that day and hadn't waited for the day to end like you're supposed to, or somebody lacking atonement, or somebody not wearing the priestly garment, or somebody who hadn't washed their hands or feet, or somebody who's not circumcised, or somebody who's impure, or by somebody who is sitting or standing on utensils or on an animal or on somebody else's feet, this receiving of the blood is invalid. It's a debate if this step is valid or not if done with one's left hand. The Gemara cites scriptural sources for each of these various actions, showing how they're prohibited while performing the service. There's a debate by several of these as to where exactly their source is. It's mostly arguing as to where we know the offering service of a non-Kohen is considered to be invalid. It also quotes how we know a mourner cannot perform this offering service, suggesting a number of options and debating them. Although it is said this mourner only invalidates a service by a private offering, by a communal offering it would be valid, although others disagree. It quotes sources for the invalidation of the service of somebody impure who immersed but the day hasn't yet ended. It discusses this, and scriptural sources for the invalidation of the service if done by somebody not wearing the priestly garments are quoted. A related topic is discussed going through the proper methods of wearing the priestly garments. It said they couldn't be too long in that they'd drag on the ground, or too short in that they'd be held up in the air. They also couldn't be old or worn out, although if they were all these, the service would still be valid. However, if the Kohen wore 2 pants, 2 belts, or was missing any of the garments, or was wearing one too many, or had a cast over a wound underneath one of the garments, or if any of the garments were filthy or torn, the service would be invalidated. Some said that actually, if the garments were too short and were suspended, the service was actually invalid, although it's specifically when they were too small to begin with and not shortened by a belt. Some say the service is even invalid if the garments are too short or too long, and they're only valid if the garment was too long and was raised to a proper height with a belt. It tries to source this apparent debate. Related, it said the priestly garments must be made of linen and must be new and made of twisted 6-fold thread. Additionally, non-consecrated garments cannot be worn alongside them. There's debate as to which of these listed requirements are essential or non-essential. There are related points. It said a Kohen who is wounded on Shabbos can wrap reed grass around it only in the temple, although if it was done to press blood out of the wound, it can't be done anywhere. Reed grass must be used as a small belt would constitute in addition to the priestly garments. Others disagree and say there's not even an issue of it causing interposition in the service, either in this case as it's on the left hand or it's on the back of his finger or similar. Evidently, there's a debate as to how much constitutes an interposition. He apparently says a patch at a minimum of 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, while others say even a single thread can create an interposition. It additionally discusses this argument. It asks on a number of different things that could possibly create an interposition. Wind blowing into a garment, a live louse, could dust be an interposition possibly? What about the space between his underarm and sleeve? Can the Kohen's own hand create an interposition if stuck into the garment? Can a hanging thread create an interposition? Can the Kohen's hair create an interposition? And does tefillin create an interposition? If that specifically the tefillin on the arm create an interposition, which is based on a verse. Anyways, it brings sources that somebody lacking atonement and somebody with unwashed hands and feet invalidate the offering service. It said elsewhere that by the Yom Kippur service, the hands and feet washing in the morning is strictly necessary, but the washings in between services and garment changes are not. It brings sources for this. The way the washing was done was that the Kohen would place his right hand on his right foot and his left hand on his left foot and wash them like that. Others say that the Kohen should place his feet on top of each other and his hands on top of each other on top of his feet while being held steady by another man so he wouldn't just fall over. The verses imply the washing must be done while standing. Anyways, it said that if the Kohen washed during the day, he doesn't need to do so by night. But if he washed by night, he must also do so by day. Others disagree and say he wouldn't need to redo it, and this is discussed further quoting various relevant verses. Based on this debate, there's a related discussion as to if the waters of the kior become impure if left overnight. It's debated, although it is ruled that if a Kohen washes his hands and feet to prepare to remove the ashes from the altar, he doesn't need to rewash them after daybreak, as he'd already done so earlier for the day. It's a debate as to who this is in accordance with. Similarly, there's a discussion as to whether leaving the temple courtyard makes rewashing necessary. This is also debated, quoting many various discussions. It's also asked whether impurity is effective in requiring the rewashing of hands and feet. That's discussed. It's also asked if the Kohanim could sanctify their hands and feet by placing them directly into the kior. It's a debate which branches into a broader point, as some hold that if the kior was unimmersed at sunset, or after, the waters within cannot be used by a Kohen for the offering blood or flour services, but they can be used to sanctify a Kohen to offer the limbs on the altar, although if the kior remains unimmersed by daybreak, its waters cannot even be used for that. Others disagree and say that there's only invalidation for services at daybreak if the kior went unimmersed. Others say that once the kior is immersed by sunset, it has to be left that way until daybreak. Some clarify this to say that it could still nevertheless be used for the night services. It debates between these opinions as to how exactly the kior was immersed. It's mentioned that they had this pulley contraption that could lower the kior overnight and was loud enough to be heard by everybody, although it was also announced by one of the Kohanim so everybody would know to start the daily services. Some say that a non-sacred vessel cannot be used for the sanctification, and it argues the source for this, quoting a few verses. Related, it's ruled that any substance that can be used to fill up the minimum necessary amount of a mikvah, being snow, ice, liquid mud, or otherwise, could also complete the necessary minimum amount of water in the kior, but cannot be used to complete the necessary minimums for washing one's hands in the morning. There are related points. It's also said that mikvah water can be validly used as sanctified kior water. It's actually a debate as to what type of water can be used in the kior. Some say it must be spring, meaning living waters. Others say it could be any water. Anyways, it brings the sources that an uncircumcised individual cannot participate in the offering services without disqualifying them. This is said to apply both to a physical lack of circumcision and also a spiritual lack, somebody with some spiritual flaw. It also brings sources for the point that somebody impure cannot perform the offering services. Some actually held it was permissible to slaughter and throw the blood of the paschal offering on behalf of somebody impure from a sheretz creature, but others argue with this. Some even bring support for the notion that bringing a paschal offering on behalf of somebody who's impure from a corpse is invalid. Again, that's disputed, although there's variation. Anyways, the source for the principle that performing the offering service while sitting is prohibited is brought. It explains that the punishment for doing so cannot be learned from other ways of improperly performing offerings due to the specifications of the verse. Also, the source for the prohibition against performing the offering service while standing on utensils or an animal or on another person's feet, that's invalid, is brought essentially as there can be no interposition between the Kohen performing the service and the temple floors. A utensil is listed as it's not a type of flesh, an animal is listed as it's not a human, and a foot is listed to show that's included as an interposition for another person. It's said if a Kohen is standing with one foot on the floor and one foot on the utensil, essentially the principle is that if the utensil were to be removed, if the Kohen could continue doing the service as he was standing, it's valid, otherwise not. If the Kohen was standing on a loose tile of the temple floor, one that was intended to be reattached, it debates if this constitutes as an interposition based on where the sanctification of the temple floor extends to. It's unresolved. There was a debate if it's valid or not to perform the temple service with one's left hand, which I'd find sources for both opinions. Others actually hold that the reception of the blood cannot be done with the left hand, but the application of the blood to the altar can be done with the left hand. It's a debate based on the specific usage of words within a few verses as to whether they imply specifically like the right hand. That's discussed. New Mishnah. If the blood from the animal offering spilled on the floor and the Kohen gathered it back up, it's invalid. The Gemara brings and discusses sources that the blood must be received directly into a vessel. It said that all of the blood must be received and also that the knife should be lifted so the blood on the knife also enters the bowl and then the blade should be wiped on the rim of the bowl. It's also said that the main blood vessels of the animal should be included into the bowl. There's a debate based on some other cases if the blood enters the airspace of the bowl and then the bottom of the bowl fell out as to whether it's considered as if the blood entered the bowl. It seems to prove from related cases by collecting water in a jug that once it enters the airspace of the jug, it's considered to have been received. This is additionally discussed. If, after the animal was slaughtered, the ear of the animal was slightly cut and then the blood was received, it's said to be invalid as it received a disqualifying blemish in between, so its status is changed. This is debated, and based on this, some explain that if an animal is slaughtered at basically exactly a year since its birth and then has its blood received a few hours later, it's invalid as it aged to 2 years old. In the meanwhile, related, some say if an offering is mostly in the temple courtyard but its legs are outside and one of the outside legs are cut off and then it's slaughtered, it's still valid. But if it was slaughtered, then a leg was mostly cut off, although not to the bone, and then the blood was received, it's invalid. It's an argument as to what can be learned from this, possibly not that blood within limbs is considered to be blood, as it's possibly invalid due to the fat within the leg, and it possibly cannot be that kache kalim offerings of lesser holiness that went outside the temple courtyard before the throwing of the blood are invalid, as the case could possibly be referring to kache kachim, offerings of greater holiness. There's related discussion on these two variants of offerings. There are related cases brought. It said if an offering is inside the courtyard and its legs are outside, it said that it can only be slaughtered once it's fully in the courtyard. Additionally, the offering cannot be suspended in the air as it's slaughtered, as this must be done at the side of the altar. Also, the slaughterer himself cannot be suspended in the air for the same reason. He also cannot be suspended while receiving the blood, but the animal can be. Others disagree and say if it's a kache kachim offering, all those listed cases are invalid, besides for when the person was suspended as he slaughtered, and if it was a kache kalim offering, all are valid besides for when the man was suspended as he received the blood. Others disagree still and say that between kache kachim and kache kalim offerings, all of these cases are valid besides for where the animal was suspended as it was slaughtered by the kache kachim alone, and where the Kohen was suspended as he received the blood by both types. Also, if the Kohen's hair is outside the courtyard, it's said to still be invalid. He needs to be fully inside. New Mishnah. If the Kohen improperly applied the blood to the ramp of the altar, or somewhere not opposite the base, or on the wrong side of the altar line, or in the wrong location, indoors instead, it's invalid, but there's no punishment of karis, which is divine punishment. The Gemara clarifies the meat of such an offering is invalid to be eaten, but the owner of the offering still receives atonement. The reason for this is that the relevant verse implies that once the blood of an offering reaches any part of the altar, it causes atonement. It debates this from other discussions, and based on this, it argues if the person offering the blood was disqualified from doing so or not. It explains to be saying that if a disqualified person slaughtered the offering as opposed to throwing the blood, a qualified person cannot repeat this. The implication from these cases is that from the reception of the blood onwards in an offering, the improper intent of a disqualified person won't invalidate the offering in accordance with one opinion. There are other questions. For instance, it said that the throwing of blood that would not permit meat for consumption cannot cause an offering to be disqualified if it is done with improper intent. Others argue with this concept. Others explain our Mishnah actually to be saying that a blood offering brought in its incorrect place is literally invalid, and it's not affecting atonement, as it was done with a statement which, as it's an incorrect statement, would invalidate it. Another explanation is that the Kohen applied the blood in silence, and actually a blood application in its incorrect place does not count if that's the circumstance. It's just that when it says that the service can be repeated, that's when there's still blood coming from the animal's neck, versus here, where it just says it's invalid, that's where there's no more blood coming out. It further debates these opinions. It tries to find sources for this latter view. Some say that the inner altar actually sanctifies invalid offerings placed on it, and are argues as to what the source for this is. New Mishnah. If somebody slaughtered an offering with intent to improperly throw the blood or part of the blood outside its said area, or to burn its sacrificial parts or parts of the sacrificial parts outside its said area, or to eat its meat or part of its meat or tail at the minimum size of an olive outside its set area, it's invalid, but there's, again, no penalty of kares, divine punishment. If the intent was to throw the blood, burn the sacrificial parts, or eat the meat the following day, that would be pigul, in violation of improper intent, and there's a liability for kares, which is divine punishment. The Gemara says, this seemingly means that the hide of the tail has the same status as the tail itself, but then there's an issue, as we stated, that if somebody intends to eat the tail hide with improper intent, it's invalid, but if somebody offers a sheep whose tail is supposed to be burnt on the altar, and has improper intent to eat it, that shouldn't invalidate the offering, so it's debated, and some simply answer that the hide of the tail does not have the same status as the tail itself by these laws. He bases this on a verse. Some actually suggest that the hide of the tail is like the tail. It's just that when the Mishnah discusses this, that having improper intent by the tail hide is invalid refers to a goat's tail, which cannot be eaten. It also explains why each opinion takes issue with the logic of the others, and it disputes these opinions from some quoted cases. Anyways, it was stated that if somebody slaughters an animal with intent to consume it outside its proper place, it's invalid, but there's no divine punishment of kares. The scriptural sources for this concept are quoted. These are additionally discussed, debating as to which verses exactly are the source and going through a number of possible options. It's additionally discussed, and there are some further points. New Mishnah. The rule is if somebody slaughters the offering or receives, carries, or throws the blood with intent to eat something that is actually meant to be eaten, or to burn something that is meant to be burned, with intent on a piece at least the size of an olive's volume, but the intent was to do this burning or eating in its improper location, the offering is invalid, but there's no divine punishment of kares. If his intent was to eat or burn in an improper time, it's pigul, a violation of improper intent, and there is a liability of kares, assuming the blood service was done properly. Regarding doing the blood service properly, it said if somebody slaughters in silence with no validating intent, and then did the blood service, receiving, carrying, or throwing the blood in the wrong time, or he slaughtered in the wrong time, but did the blood service with no intent, or he slaughtered and did the blood service all at the wrong time, in these cases, the blood service has still been offered as required. However, if somebody slaughtered in the incorrect location and did the blood service in the wrong time, or did the slaughtering in the wrong time and did the blood service in the wrong place, or he slaughtered and did the blood service all in the wrong place, or by a paschal or chatas offering, he slaughtered not for its own sake and did the blood service at the wrong time, or he slaughtered in the wrong time and did the blood service not for its own sake, or he slaughtered and did the blood service all not for its own sake. In all these cases, the blood service was not offered as required. Additionally, if somebody intended to eat an olive's volume of the offering outside its place, and then intended to consume it the next day, or he intended to consume the olive's volume the next day and then intended to consume it outside its place, or he intended to eat half an olive's volume outside and then half an olive's volume the next day, or he intended for half the volume the next day and then for a half to be eaten outside, the offering is invalid, but there's no penalty of karas. There's a dispute. Rabbi Yehuda says, whenever the intent of time precedes the intent of place, the offering is pigul and there's a liability of karas. If the intent of place goes before the intent of time, the offering is invalid, but there's no karas. The sages disagree and say either way the offering is invalid and there's no karas. It is, however, agreed if somebody intends to eat half an olive's volume and to burn half an olive's volume with improper time or place, the offering is still valid as eating and burning do not combine. The Gemara says regarding the debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the sages, that's explained to be dealing with two services, and if they're dealing with one service, it's agreed there's no pigul as it's a combination of intents. Others disagree and say the dispute applies even within one service. It debates between these opinions going through a number of cases. It also further discusses this argument as to whether an initial improper intent of time precedes the improper intent of location, if that has primacy over the other. There are a few particularly discussed cases involving intent for half an olive's volume with intent for improper time and half an olive's volume with intent for improper location. They're discussed further, and it debates sources for the opinions as to whether or not it's considered a combination of intents. It's also said if somebody intends for dogs to consume an olive's volume of an offering the next day based on a verse, it's considered to be pigul in violation of improper intent. That's qualified. It's also asked, what's the status if somebody intended to have an olive's volume brought in an improper time or place to be eaten by two different people? It's a debate as to whether the amount goes by the intent, which is a full olive volume and would be disqualified, or by those consuming it, which is less than the minimum volume. It says it would still be invalidated, and it's then also debated if somebody intends to eat an olive's volume of an offering in an improper time or location, but over a very long course of time, longer than it takes to eat a paras. It's a debate. Lastly, it was said that if somebody intended to eat half an olive's volume and to burn half an olive's volume, it's valid as eating and burning don't combine. This would imply that if both intents were to eat the parts of the offering, even if one part shouldn't be eaten, they would combine to invalidate the offering. This is argued, and it's explained that it specified eating and burning don't combine, as those things individually are things that are typically done, so it had to specify that they don't combine. And that's the end of chapter 2.